The following is a conversation with Lisa Vincent. Lisa is the CEO and founder of HowToo, an award-winning digital training platform that prioritizes accessibility and equitable learning experiences. Prior to founding HowToo, Lisa was involved in creating learning solutions and software. Her perspective on accessibility shifted after attending an event where she heard first-hand accounts from people with disabilities about the impact of inaccessible content in their lives. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us. Subscribe to the Bytes podcast for more conversations like this.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of Bytes with Beck and Benji. I'm Beck, and with me, as always, is Benji.
Hey, everyone.
Now, today, we're going to be talking about something, I guess, on the fringe of cyber, but it's extremely important. And that's transforming compliance to culture with accessibility, universal design, and inclusivity, because everyone deserves to be educated in cyber. But if it's not accessible to you, where do you start? So we have a special guest today. Benji, would you like to do the honors?
Absolutely. So we're incredibly lucky to be speaking to one of our partners here. Lisa Vincent is the CEO and founder of HowToo, which is an authoring tool predicated on accessibility and providing equitable learning for all those involved. They're an award-winning digital training platform, and Lisa's been the founder for many years now, amongst other education startups in her past. So incredibly excited to be chatting to you, Lisa, and particularly with your expertise in the space of accessibility. So thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Wonderful.
So I note that, when it comes to things like accessibility, a lot of the time, particularly in my experience with education, higher education, accessibility is often seen as this thing that is done when needed. So a student reaches out, I have some level of vision difficulty or hearing difficulty, and the lecturer, academic, whoever's involved will generally provide the material in an alternate format. And one of the things that I've learned over my career in higher ed was this new concept, or older concept, that has been kind of now brought to more modern styles of delivery, universal design for learning. And could you kind of explore that concept a bit more for those that may not be too across what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I kind of had that attitude in the past a bit way back when I've been involved in creating learning solutions and software for many years. And, in those earlier days, I think I did see it as a bit of a hassle, a bit of a headache, and we would often weave it in at the end, which is not ideal. It's more expensive, and it's also doesn't necessarily have that kind of intention around ensuring it's inclusive. So universal design is really around including everyone, all of your audience in that design process. And I think even involving those people you're designing for from the get-go is really key. And that includes people with a disability. And so the thing that actually exposed me to universal design and accessibility was when I engaged with a company called Intopia that were doing some fantastic work in this space. And I went to a Bytes session, and hearing from people with a disability about the impact of content, and whether it be in the physical realm or the digital realm, experiences that were not accessible, the impact it was having on their lives. They didn't have access to the same things that 80% of the rest of the population did. And that was really a human right that I thought we needed to address. So we actually then approached that with the design of our software to make it accessible from the get-go, which was a lot more work to do so. But, I think it's that thinking differently about who is your audience and ensuring that you're designing for that purpose of everybody.
Absolutely.
And from a learning perspective, I think, we all need to keep learning. And if you don't have access to that same experience, then you're being extremely disadvantaged.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a point of what you said that I think relates directly to cyber, in that when approaching secure design and designing secure systems or secure applications, one of the things that the industry is moving towards is actually secure software design. And what that means is shifting security left in the software design process. Security isn't then considered right before you put it out to the public, but rather at every stage of the design life cycle. And while that may appear at the outset to be more laborious and more expensive, it actually is significantly less costly to retrofit all of these things later on when you realize there's security issues. And it strikes me as a similar approach.
Yeah, they go hand in hand.
You invest the time up front, you scope it and conduct the, due diligence with the audience that needs that material appropriately. And then that way you spend less time fixing it, plugging gaps, redeploying things. And in the education space, I feel like it saves you time not having to address individual students with their individual circumstances around the inability to engage with the content.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's that early stage where you're developing it conceptually. If you can be thinking about all those aspects, the audience, the cyber impact, any other issues that you consider, it's important to sort of keep them at the front end, and that time invested at the early stages will then be, well invested for the future and of that solution, because you've thought through all those issues right at the get-go. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Are you still finding even today more things you can do when making these authoring tools and for accessibility? Are there always new things to introduce?
Yeah, so I mean, we follow the WCAG 2.2 AA standards, which are, I think, the baseline as a starting point.
I will just ask, do you know what
yes.
WCAG stands for those that don't know? No, I know, obviously we deal with it every day, but...
Yeah, so Web Content Accessibility
Guidelines.
Guidelines. Absolutely.
We use it all the time, and then we're sort of like, oh, what is it? So that's sort of, I mean, I don't know whether you want me to cover a bit on those kind of principles, but
yes,
from
please.
a digital learning and a digital perspective, you sort of have, we use the PAW principles, which you may have heard of. So it's perceivable, so things like color contrast, text enlargement is key. Operable, so you don't have to use a mouse, you can use a keyboard and different ways of actually accessing that content. Understandable, so it's structured in a way that when a screen reader reads the page, it's got a proper heading levels and all those sorts of things, so it makes sense. And robust, so it means that a screen reader can actually read it correctly. And so with digital learning and with software, you build all of that in so that when content is created, it's already been thought through.
Already,
and ours does
compliant.
a test as well, so it tests whether you've done your alt text, which describes graphics on screen if you can't see them, those sorts of things. So those are sort of the baseline of what we do. And then I think it's also looking at things like, other types of disabilities, so intellectual disabilities, dyslexia, other sorts of challenges that people have that we're starting to engage more on how we can make that content more effective. And I think a huge opportunity is adaptive learning.
I couldn't agree more, yes.
Learning that adapts to the needs of learners, I think is really core, and AI is a massive driver and a huge opportunity, and we're really doubling down and leaning into this at the moment.
Awesome.
And so I think there's huge opportunity there and I actually think technology is a massive enabler for people with a disability.
Absolutely.
I went to an event with Dylan Alcott the other week where he was the Australian of the Year, and he's he's a disabled tennis player, and he was talking a bit about some of the technology that's out there for digital content, but also in the physical realm, and the change even with voice recognition and all the things that are happening. I think it's really shifting the gears a lot for people who have a disability and really changing things up, which is really exciting.
I love HowToo's mission around democratizing the experience of engaging with education, and it's something that we at Phriendly Phishing are all about around, if you can't engage with these materials, your human firewall, for lack of a better expression, is not as resilient, and there are going to be chinks in that armor and cracks in the chain. So,
and it's frustrating, right? I mean, if you can't engage with learning content, you just won't do it.
Particularly if you're so interested and want to, but the actual thing won't like return the engagement. There's no feedback loop that's positive. So I can see how learners would get disengaged, frustrated, almost blame themselves in some respects of like, I should be able to get this, but I'm not. So that empathy around designing a learning that caters to them, which to your point around adaptive learning is another thing Phriendly Phishing is starting to explore around. Not all learners have the same knowledge base, and particularly when we're talking about cyber training, you know, you may be working with an organization that has IT staff that are far more across technical subject matter versus, you know, other employees that may not be. And it's around catering that learning to their knowledge and coming to where they are, meeting them where they're at, and not saying you should be where we are and what can we tell you.
It's a bit like the curse of knowledge where you think, well, if I know, then everyone else must already know as well. This is very simple.
100%.
Lisa, could you explain a little bit about some of the ideas behind adaptive learning and an example, maybe?
Yeah, so the opportunity of adaptive learning is where learning will adapt to the context that you're in. So if I need some specific sales training around a particular conversation that I'm going to have with a prospect, I've got some challenging objections that I need to deal with. If I could access some learning content that is aligned with my current capability level, so you know, I might be pretty good at handling objections, but I need just a little bit of help around the nuancing of that. So it's around my capability, the context of the type of conversation I'm going to have, and also sort of in the flow of work. So I'm actually getting that content and that learning in context.
At the right time.
At the right time. So that content is coming to me. If it was cyber, it might be, you know, something specific around my particular level of cyber literacy, right? It
Even
could be
phishing,
you know,
as an example.
Exactly.
IT staff deal with phishing probably a lot more regularly than general employees, so they would be likely more adept at identifying those. So then taking those staff through look for the domain that is unusual. It makes them disengage from the training because they're like, duh. But that's not a duh for the whole audience at the organization. And
So another example, you know, we do phishing tests with ISO 27001 accredited. So we're actually really into cyber. And I have to be honest, I was the early one that was I kept failing. I keep saying the CEO often fails. So we get the test, and then a little bit of learning then is pumped to me post my so test. So then I'm doing a little bit of learning at my level. Where did I make the mistake? What kind of learning do I need to do to make sure I don't do it again?
Absolutely.
And I think it's like it's and again, if you relate it to accessibility and everyone as an audience, I think accessible design and adaptive design is better for everyone, right?
100%.
And that's around universal design. If we're actually taking this approach that we're going to adapt, we're going to cater for different circumstances and levels of competency or different abilities, then surely that's good for everyone. We don't want to be doing things we already know, like you know, and I think that's often been the issue with learning.
Yes, particularly
solutions.
L&D and HR, L&D adjacent learning. I feel like more often than not, people look at it as a checkbox exercise where as long as I get the 80% plus, I'm done. Whereas moving the culture to actually engage with the material provided as though it is valuable and sets that culture and kind of drives others into engaging in a similar behavior. I think that's where it tips. Is this a checkbox, or is this something that I can actively engage with and perpetuate throughout my organization as well, across my colleagues and stakeholders?
One thing I have noticed these days, people are a lot more open about their difficulties in either accessibility or even just the ability to learn in itself. So I think having the options for learning in different ways, because some people don't know that they have either a learning disability or, you know, a comprehension issue with how things work, and giving them that option is like, oh wow, I actually am good at learning. I can do this when it's presented to them that way. Yeah, and isn't it great if you actually are given a way of learning that more adapts to your, I'm not saying learning styles because that's not really the thing, but your particular needs and wants and preferences,
and then you actually have success, that's good for everyone, and it's good for organizations as well.
The data is more relevant and meaningful because the people are actually getting the questions based on their actual competency. So
Correct.
the actual picture becomes a lot clearer of the understanding across the organization as a result. So I think accessibility has many dividends that it pays, despite it being this thing that you do spend a lot of time in the very nitty-gritty detail of, as an example, Storyline, classic authoring tool, every trigger and every alt text on every image had to be individually put there. And so things like HowToo and going to your point around more people expect kind of learning that they can engage with, having that built into the authoring tool is, from a content developer and learning designer perspective, is a game changer. Yeah. I'm very used to authoring tools where that level of expectation is a lot more time consuming, where I feel like a lot of them could be automated in a similar fashion, but there just isn't enough drive and impetus to do so in a lot of ways. Can you speak to some of the challenges around coordinating a software that does these things and how difficult that was?
Yeah, so I mean, as a startup, when we built the software originally, you're dealing with a certain amount of funds to do it, and it's going to take a certain amount of time, and you want to get that off on the market and out being sold into the market. But for us, one of the key drivers was to ensure it was accessible, but that required a lot of work around thinking about the page setup, the headings, the alt text, the accessibility
different
checker,
assistive tools would engage with it.
Yeah, and when you're looking at different device access, all the testing that went in for the screen readers, all that sort of stuff. But the fact that we built it in from the beginning, and that's the problem with a lot of the other software out there, is because it was built before and it wasn't actually thought about or even committed to. So as a business, that needed to come from me, and a culture that we had to ensure that everybody was obsessed about ensuring that this tool and everything that's produced out of the tool was going to be accessible. And that also means that because it's all built in, it's not a case of people deciding, I'm going to do my little custom code and my triggers to make this work. So even with customers that don't necessarily understand what accessibility is, we're like, it's accessible, and it means
it just is.
So we spread the word. And we're evangelists, I suppose, for this as a movement. And so, yes, of course, government, big corporates and education have definitely been committed to this, but there are many other organisations that aren't aware. And it's so good to see other software out there that is definitely enabled. So LinkedIn, when you do a LinkedIn post, you can do some alt text and to describe the visual that you're sharing.
And auto captions.
Now, I don't know whether everybody's as aware of it, so it is important to spread the word so people use. And it'd be really great, actually, if that software said you haven't put your
on that. Absolutely.
And that's what we're
You've only done like 3 or 5 things.
So that's what kind of we do.
Do you think the highlighting is a key aspect? Because if you don't know, but then something tells you, you're like, now I can address that. So just simply knowing that the thing is aware you as the author may not know, I think is an incredibly important part of it. And embedding it throughout organizations holistically.
Yeah, so we have before you publish, it tells you you just need to put your alt text in and a few other things.
That's great.
I think with new AI features, probably even you won't have to do that soon.
Yeah, it'll do it itself.
But I think it's good for people to know still, what's being done under the hood and why.
I think having that effort involved is a bit more part of success as well, because we can pass these jobs off to AI, but I guess it kind of makes you lazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, while an AI might be able to add an alt text, is it the alt text that the learner should be taking away from the image? Is that image decorative or is it supplementing the information that's written as well? And I think that's the human necessary element of designing education by humans for humans in a lot of ways.
I see there's like a lot of, as you've been talking about all these accessibility tools, I see a huge similarity between SEO. I used to be an SEO person back in the day, and it was all about alt tags and, the size of text and headings and things like that. And you look at a website sometimes and the images would say person sitting in chair or things like that. And they had to be unique, but they didn't actually describe the picture or what the takeaway should be. So I would always chuckle when I saw something that just says, red can or something, but the actual image is trying to show someone, pouring a ratio or something like that.
And it's a really good point, Beth, because there are kind of different nuances between WCAG standards for the internet and WCAG standards for authoring tools that create learning. And HowToo is really good at reaching WCAG 2.1 AAA. WCAG is also one of those things that changes over time. If I'm not mistaken, WCAG 3 came out not long ago, which has like a whole other level of consideration. So it is this ever-evolving space where the more assistive technologies or AI gets baked into these things, we can then elevate the minimum standard of accessibility. How would you recommend organizations get involved in if this is brand new to them? They've just heard the word accessibility and they're like, I don't know that we do that. Are there any kind of pieces of advice and guidance you would say, start looking here to implement these things across your organization?
Yeah, so I think probably don't go into WCAG, the WCAG documentation first would be my suggestion. Because that's very dry and feels a bit compliancy, tick boxy type thing. I think it's a bit like the culture of compliance you talked about before. I think you need to get into the hearts and minds of it first. So the thing that changed me, and I think it is a thing about change. So I think it's getting off and going to an event around accessibility where you actually meet people who are living with a disability and share their views around accessibility. So it's really talking to people about it first and understanding the value of it, because as soon as you understand the value, then I think you can move to the understanding the specifics and the nuts and bolts, because that all has the context of the why.
Love that.
And I think the why also in larger organizations, there are definitely people who will be, in your organization and living with a disability, and it's understanding their experiences working in those organizations. So over the years, we've also tried to employ people from a variety of backgrounds, and I think that sort of exposure, it brings it to life for you. Some of our customers have also had people with a disability who will test the software and will sit with them and understand their perspective in much more depth. So I think it's the why first, and then the how and the what and everything else is actually pretty straightforward once you actually see it as important.
I think that's an amazing piece of advice because you're right, it is it's a people issue not issue, but it's a people kind of consideration, and it's a thing that people can implement. So without that kind of understanding of why would we be doing this, it's very hard to get behind it. And I went through a similar change in working in higher education and working with academics around, putting their units together in a way that does cater to universal design for learning and doesn't just send a transcript because a student requested it. The transcript was put on the page to begin with. And one of the things that I really took away from that was even just the disconnect that there may be between those designing learning and those engaging with the learning with those assistive technologies. A perfect example would be I watched someone listening to a video, and the speed at which they were listening to the video with those assistive tools is like 10 times. Whereas I listen to things at 1.25 and I'm like, that's quick. That's way too quick to even comprehend. They're listening to things like chipmunk style, and internalizing all of it. So even the way that their brains work with engaging with the material you created is different to the way you think they may engage with it. And I think to that point of bringing those people into the fore of design, that only makes the product stronger because they can bring those unique perspectives to the front.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's just a universal principle of design generally, isn't it? I mean, really involving your audience and your users in the process of the design is going to create a better outcome, and watching them consume it, because you don't know, like you say, you don't know how they're going to consume the content or the experience. So bringing them into that process is really valuable.
Yeah, and you don't have a product if you're not making it for the person who you want to buy it. It's kind of just product marketing as well as the accessibility. I'm wondering if you know much about how, so we talk a lot about organizations and higher education. But what about like primary education and secondary education? Is there a movement there for accessibility and learning for children?
Yeah, very good question. So I don't work much with students in secondary education, but certainly work with providers of training for teachers. And accessibility for teachers is absolutely key and critical for that audience. But I would imagine in the secondary education space, absolutely critical. Because again, even more so, the key to your future
as
is
you're
your
shaping
education.
that mind, you want them to have the best foundation. I guess,
Yes.
I mean, all secondary students have their laptops now as well, which is a huge difference from when I was at school. So even just that accessibility, like, blows my mind.
I would also wonder, at least in my experience with universities, it generally sits with the librarian staff. They're like the experts of all things assistive technology. Generally, in that I learned so much around, JAWS or NVDA or all of these different kind of assistive tools specifically and how they work from the library staff. And I wonder if the average teacher in secondary school would necessarily be across it, whereas the support staff may be more aware of it. Library staff are very aware of students not engaging with content and then giving them like another book or another alternative medium. So
but not all students know to ask.
And this is the crux of it, is I do wonder if the focus should be less on maybe providing accessible content for everyone, as opposed to these are the tools you can use to engage with the content. So it's almost like teaching a man to fish rather than handing him the fish, accessible fish, if you will. How much is that potentially what's missing from the education space at that level?
Yeah.
Certainly, I think there's probably opportunity to be wider, broader understanding of the value of accessibility and the principles of it around our whole learning ecosystem, whether it be through early childhood through to
Society,
primary, secondary,
really.
like generally in society.
Yeah.
And I think there is generally not necessarily a huge understanding out there about accessibility and the principles and the value. And so I think there's a huge opportunity more broadly. And it's interesting, because often the cost issue is kind of often touted as the reason. And we talked more about earlier about how, it depends on what your perspective is. If you're in a wheelchair, well, you save someone a chair. If you're blind, you don't have to turn the lights on. So it depends on what way you look at it. But I think also, where was I going with this? I've just completely going on it. Oh, yes. So Dylan Alcott, I'm kind of getting back to him again, but he talked about also the market of it's trillions of like there's a business opportunity for accessibility
because
there's
it also
a huge market
changes
there.
life, right? So you will
Exactly.
pay an exorbitant fund or whatever fee is necessary because it changes your life. So the supply demand aspect, the demand is through the roof for these tools and these products.
So there's an economic angle to it as well that perhaps people don't think about when they think about accessibility.
It reminds me of how, the NDIS system here in Australia got overwhelmed when it got opened up to accessibility options, not just, say, physical impairments and things like that, because the government just didn't realise how widespread it was. And now they've had to sort of pull back on that and wonder, what else can we do here? Because we just got overwhelmed with requests.
Well, to that point, I mean, Australian society does cater in the societal aspects to some levels of accessibility, even as far as you press the traffic light and it will make a sound for those that are sight impaired but have.
Well, you've got the light up tiles now, and
there's always ramps so people in wheelchairs can actually get on sidewalks. So society has in a weird way catered to some of these very baseline effects that impact individuals, but as soon as it gets into, say, the workplace, and this is something I would love to get your opinion on, is having built a tool specifically for education to bring people on the journey. If I was to, as an organization, hypothetically employ someone that has sight impairment or vision impairment or some level of physical impairment, in order to give them a role, say in cyber, working with the security of the SOC, what level of assistive tooling would need to be required in order to ensure that individual is set up for success in that role? Is that a consideration or a compliance aspect that organizations need to or should consider?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think they need to think about different types of requirements and needs depending on what the disability is. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think that organizations need to be looking at how they can create working environments that are accessible for all. And it's because it's a huge like labor force, like sort of talent pool that people are missing out on. And I think that's a huge issue. And there's also software as well that's popping up. Like another female founder I'm in a community with has a platform called Bindi Maps, which basically helps organizations create like the internal mapping within an organization for people who are visually impaired. It's just one example,
awesome.
which is amazing.
Yeah.
And so that can be within organizations and also just in public places, in airports and all
That
sorts
is
of
so
things.
missing from like Google Maps, I swear.
Yeah.
Getting into a large building.
So check it out, Bindi
Excuse me.
Maps. So she's doing her thing, and it came from her own individual challenge to do that. So that's just one example of how an organisation can support, in that case, workers who are visually impaired and can't find their way around, the workplace. So just one example of what can be done. But there's a lot of work to be done, I think. And I think it comes back to a change in perspective, a change in the way we see this audience, the way we see this potential opportunity.
And also just inviting people to speak up about it as well.
Yes.
Being open about
It's
their
been hard for
stories.
such a long time for people to say, actually, this isn't working for me and it's impacting my work.
And I think the opportunity of technology is extraordinary now.
Yep.
The technology, I think we've said that people can access now to overcome some of those challenges it's a game changer as well.
Absolutely.
So, and there's nothing better than work and learning to be confident and contributing and all the sorts of things we need in a society. So everybody wins if we can address this in the workplace and also in the learning sphere as well, and in the security and compliance space as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the more involved the entire organization can be, the more protected the entire organization is. If you have missing links of people that just can't get the information they need to protect everyone else, you really are doing yourself a disservice as the organization. And I think that is the crux there of compliance to culture is bringing everyone on that journey so that they can engage with the material that keeps everyone safe. Thank you so much for your time today, Lisa. This was a fascinating conversation. I'm really, really excited to see the response to not only this podcast, but also some of the new training that we're putting out around, particularly driven by accessibility. And yeah, we can't wait to see more of what HowToo has come down the line.
We've actually got a little module on accessibility, so you could share that.
Amazing.
Excellent.
So yeah,
Perfect.
I don't know how, but anyway.
In HowToo.
Yeah, it's built in HowToo.
Amazing.
So you can learn about accessibility. So very happy to share that.
Why don't you
it's
check
all
out...
about the core principles. So
Love
Fantastic. We'll add it to the page.
that. Absolutely. Check out the link on the page and you can get a nice direct view of what HowToo offers.
excellent. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you in the next Bites with Beck and Benji.